I'm Tammy Kolda, an applied mathematician, and this is Unlocking LaTeX Graphics. Today I'll be talking about arranging multiple images in a figure using TikZ. There are many ways to arrange images in LaTeX, such as mini pages, subfigures, and subcaptions, but I like using TikZ because it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of placement and styling. I'll cover how to put an image inside a node. I'll use the positioning library to arrange the images. I'll also show how to add text below each image and how to use the subcaption package to create cross-referenceable figures. The videos on this channel are based on my book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, as well as some bonus materials. Today I'll be using an example that comes from my other book, Tensor Decompositions for Data Science, written with my colleague, Gray Ballard. I'll include a link with more information about that book in the show notes. Here's the document setup for today's episode. The packages parskip, full page, and hyperref are for general document formatting and not important for anything I'm talking about today. The package GraphicX is needed to include the images. The TikZ package is what we'll use for arranging the images, and we'll also use the positioning library to place the images relative to one another. Now let's add a figure with two images. I'm going to paste this and compile it, and then I'll explain it. So I'm adopting the images from the book I mentioned, Tensor Decompositions for Data Science, by myself and Gray Ballard. And then we have here a style named image that I haven't put anything in yet. Then we have our figure, it's centered, and then we're putting a TikZ picture inside of our figure. And in there, we have two nodes, and the node distance for the positioning library is 5 millimeters vertically and 5 millimeters horizontally. And then I'm placing one image first, and then to the right of that, I'm putting a second image. I'll link to the other episode that covers the positioning library, but I think you get the idea here. This is right of original, and it's using that default distance of 5 millimeters. Let's take a closer look at what's going on with these image nodes. Let me first add draw to the style, and we'll draw the outlines of those. Now we can see that there's actually some extra space around each image because of the inner separation on the node. So let's remove that by adding intercept equals 0. And then I'll link to the episode where I covered nodes and their options in the show notes. But recompiling this, now there's only a tiny bit of space around the images, which this little bit of white space is actually part of the image itself. You could try to trim that off, but we're not going to worry about that here. We can also change the scaling of the images via the node options. I like this because it's easy to apply to all the images at once rather than typing the option for each image. So here I'm going to do scale equals 0.5 to make the images a little smaller. Now let's add some text underneath each image. We can do this by adding a node below each image node. First, I'm going to create a style to make it easy to place these nodes relative to their parent node. Let me paste that here. So this is a style with an argument, and the style is named subcap. It's going to be placed 2 millimeters below number 1, which is the argument that I'm going to give to it. And then it sets the font and the alignment. I covered styles with arguments in another episode, which I'll link in the show notes. Now that we've defined the subcap style, we can go down and add some nodes here. So I'm going to place two new nodes, and I'm using the format subcap equals and then the node name for the node that I want it to be below. So when I compile this, I now get two captions below my nodes. This is a nice example of using styles with arguments. Now let's add a couple more images to the figure. First, I'll add the image nodes to the right of the existing node. So here I put a node to the right of comp 1, and then I name that comp 2, and then I put a node to the right of comp 2, and I name that comp 3. So when I compile that, we get two additional images. And now I'll go ahead and add the corresponding text to go below each image. So here we have their captions, and when we compile that, we see that we get all our images. Now that I have all these set up, I can easily modify various parameters. For example, I can change the scale of all the images at once by changing the scale in the image style. For example, let's make all these a little bit smaller by changing their scale to be 0.4. I can also make the frame thicker by adding ultra thick to the drawing. So I can say ultra thick here. And now we have these very thick frames around our drawings. I could also just remove the frames altogether, which is what I'm going to go ahead and do here because we don't really need those for any reason. Let me go ahead and just change the scale to be 0.45 for now. Next, I can also change the spacing between the images by changing the distances in the node distance option. So for example, let's make this 3 millimeters and 3 millimeters instead. That'll bring the images just a little closer together. Now it's actually pretty easy to rearrange the figure because we're using the position library. I can just change the positions of the image nodes. For example, I can put the last two images below the first two images by changing the relative position of the third figure to be below the first figure rather than to the right of the second figure. So what do I mean? So let me change this to below of a ridge. And so now it will be below the first figure. Now you can see there's a bit of a problem here because it's too close vertically to the other figure. And I can fix that by changing the vertical distance to be 8 millimeters rather than 3 millimeters. Now I've made a little more space. Okay, now we're at a point where maybe everything is great and we can stop here. But I want you to notice one thing. If I reference the figure, I do ref fig example, that'll give me figure 1. But if I want to reference one of the subfigures, as it is right now, I have to manually type A, B, C, or D. If I want to actually reference those subfigures, I need to do something more. And one way we can do it is by using the subcaption package. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. So the first step is that I'll add the subcaption package to the preamble. I'll also do a little bit of setup. I'm going to do the subcaption style to be footnote size. It's done a little bit different than the way we do our setup for TikZ nodes. You don't put a slash in front of footnote size. This is a whole different library. When I'm saying every subcaption should be footnote size. Next, I need to change the subcap style that I'm using down here. And I need to specify the width of the nodes. So I'm going to say the text width is 3.5 centimeters. I'm also setting the inner separation to be 0. And that's because subcaption already adds padding around the text. It also gets completely confused if you don't set the text width. It really needs to know how much space it has to work with. I also want to change the below part to be 0 millimeters below the image rather than 2 millimeters because again, the subcaption package is going to add its own padding. So now that I have all that, I now can change all these nodes to be subcaptions rather than just text. So let me paste here what I'm going to do and I'll explain it. So here I have the first of the nodes. So subcap equals a ridge as before. That's telling me to put it below. But now I have the text inside subcaption, and then I can add a label after that. So here we go. When we compile it, now you see it doesn't look much difference, but all those A, B, C, and D are automatically added. So now I can remove those from the text, which I did. So before I had an explicit A there. One thing that is kind of useful if you're debugging is to turn on the draw option for the nodes that contain the captions. And you can see where they're going. These subcaptions, it looks like they even overlap each other a little bit. That's fine, but if my captions were doing that and I didn't want them to, I could make the text width a little bit narrower. Now that we have the subcaptions set up, our subfigures are referenceable. So let me give you an example of referencing a subfigure. So I'll just say the original is in figure tilde/ref fig : a ridge, which is the name that we gave to this one. And you can see that it points out that that's figure 1A. And just again, so you can see where I put that immediately following the subcaption, I put the label. I could also put it inside the subcaption. Either way works. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on arranging images in a figure using TikZ by putting images inside the individual nodes. One secret is to ensure that the inner separation for the image nodes is set to 0 so there isn't extra space around the images. I also showed how to use the positioning library to arrange the images easily, including rearranging them if you decide to change things up. I also showed how to add text below each image using nodes positioned relative to the image nodes. You could also put these same kind of nodes on top or anywhere else you needed. You can get really fancy by using the subcaption package to add referenceable subcaptions below each image. I've only touched the surface of what you can do with arranging images in TikZ. Let me know if there is something else you'd like to see covered. I include a link to the overleaf document I created today in the show notes. If you found this helpful or interesting, please click like or subscribe. If you have TikZ or PGF plots questions, please post them in the comments. If you want to learn more, please check out the other videos. I also have a book, Unlocking LaTeX Graphics, available for purchase at major book retailers. Thanks for watching.